Greetings, I'm Yvonne Stapp for Science for the Public, and I welcome you to our Contemporary Science Issues and Innovations program. Today, we discuss probably the most important report on the state of planet Earth and its life, the life that depends on its stability. The report, called Safe and Just Earth System Boundaries, is the work of a large international team of distinguished scientists from the Earth Commission and has received a lot of attention in the press. One of those scientists, Diana Liverman, joins us today to explain the scope and implications of this report. Dr. Liverman is a Regents Professor at the University of Arizona School of Geography, Development, and Environment. Dr. Liverman, welcome and thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Good. And if you would start us, this is just a very important report. It is the most important report on the subject of our planet that I've seen, and I hope it gets a great deal of publicity. It already has, but here is the thing. Most people know the different components like climate change and the ecology systems and things like that, but they have not heard of the term Earth System Boundaries. That's a lot less familiar, and I wonder if you'd explain generally what that means, and then we'll go into detail.
So the idea of Earth system boundaries is that the Earth system is changing quite rapidly. That's climate, water, biodiversity, and it's changing so rapidly we might be meeting tipping points. So what we're trying to do with Earth system boundaries is to define the changes that start to bring us into very dangerous conditions. And it builds on the idea of planetary boundaries, which was developed in 2009, where we set 9 limits. This one is a revision of the planetary boundaries, but what we've done is add the idea of justice.
Yes, so but I want to come to that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so we're trying to protect the planet whilst also making sure all of the inhabitants of the planet are have a decent level of well-being.
Right. First, though, I need to understand what those components actually are. So we know about climate and so on, and you mentioned a couple of the other things, like the water. These are systems, I think. Is that what you wanted to emphasize? And could you just tell us what's in that? What are those systems that we need to pay attention to?
So there are 5 major systems that we're looking at. Climate, the biosphere, water, nutrient pollution, and air pollution.
Okay.
And those are all ones that threaten well-being and the stability of the planet.
Right.
And what we've done is within those, some of those areas, we have more than one boundary, like for the biosphere or for water.
Yes, right. And so these systems, the boundaries, things that you don't want to get past because it will endanger those systems and the planet, then that is what we're trying to get clear here, that the boundaries have been overstepped, breached, I guess, in most of those. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Of the 7 boundaries that we looked at, all but one, which is the one that around aerosols and air pollution, has been reached.
Right. And
I mean, the boundary that I think most people are most familiar with is the 1.5 centigrade target for global warming. But there are boundaries that we've set for these other domains as well.
Right, and that is one of the most important things to lay out there in that report. We don't run across these boundaries in talking about the danger of air pollution or the fertilizer overdoses and so on. So this is what we wanted to get at, and then. So again, you say the boundaries have been breached in most of those systems. That's correct?
The boundaries in terms of the safety of the Earth system have been breached.
Right.
But they've also been breached in terms of the injustices associated.
Right. And we'll come to that. That's a big chunk of this and a unique function of this. I want to get at the systems themselves that in this report, they are interdependent. And that is one of these things that we don't get very often in reports. So could you give us an idea of how these systems like water and the ecosystems, biosystems, how are these interdependent?
So we know, for example, that global warming is threatening biodiversity. So that's one very important implication. And also the biosphere actually cools the planet and takes up carbon. So you really have to look at climate and the biosphere together. Similarly, climate change is affecting water resource availability, although there are things other than climate change as well. So the nutrients, for example, like phosphorus and nitrogen, are polluting the water resources so that they're not usable.
Exactly. Could you explain a little more about that? Because I don't think that is familiar, that big agriculture has done so much damage or is doing this, so people don't maybe know a lot about the nitrogen, phosphorus. Could you just explain that a little bit?
Sure. So nitrogen and phosphorus extensively used in agriculture, mostly chemical agriculture. And the excess use of them goes into water sources and pollutes them. And it does a process called eutrophication that gets rid of the oxygen, and then that makes it very difficult for life to exist. And you also get things like dead zones in the ocean. And so the problem here is that we're putting too much nitrogen and phosphorus in some parts of the world, and it's a risk of pollution. And in fact, we're exceeding what we think are safe boundaries globally for nitrogen and phosphorus use.
Thank you very much for that. This report does such a great job of explaining these things, and it is a single source, a single resource, and I think accessible for people. We will put the title of it and a link for it for the Nature article up. But you mentioned just this one thing: massive agriculture, big agriculture has done so much damage, although initially you can feed a lot of people out of it, but there are very grim repercussions in terms of the biosystems and the planet in generally, the hydrosystems and so on. You bring up in this other systems like the water system, and thank you for mentioning the hydroelectric dams in this report as well, that these kinds of things have done a lot of damage. Okay, so we have this problem of these systems that are interdependent, and then we have breached what they can take, what they can endure in many respects. Please now tell us this other really important part that you have included, the justice part of this report.
Yeah, and that's what makes the Earth system boundaries approach different and hopefully moves us ahead. So we do have targets already, the Sustainable Development Goals, that talk about eradicating poverty and protecting the biosphere. But what we do with Earth system boundaries is actually try to quantify and specify how one should address justice. And we do it in two ways. One is we say that when you set a boundary or a target, you should be minimizing harm, loss of life, loss of biodiversity. And secondly, we do address the fact that 700 million people or more lack access to the basic food and water they need. So the tension in what we're trying to do is to both minimize harm and reduce changes in the Earth system, whilst also bringing those people out of poverty and giving them the well-being they need. So it's a dual challenge of helping people and the planet at the same time. And one ramification of that is, whereas the Earth system might be stable at 1.5 degrees centigrade, there are still millions of people dying at the warming that we have already, which is 1.2.
Yes.
So we actually say the safe and just Earth system boundary should be 1 degree, which is a much tougher target for us to achieve, but it would save millions of lives if we can keep warming at that level.
Right, and we've already passed that level. But you bring out this. That's one of the really important things, unique features of this report, that it says that what we're doing to the planet is just ruining the population, and it is not just the human population, and it will be billions down the line, but rather than millions, and it's already obvious, but also the systems, plant life and animal life, and as you know, we're already in a mass extinction. So it's affecting life in general, and this is really important that it takes up the justice.
Just talk about our principles of justice. They address exactly what you were talking about.
Yes.
We look at 3 arenas of justice. One is interspecies. So what are we doing to hurt other forms of life?
Yes.
Another is intergenerational. What are we doing for future generations? But the other one is within our generation, all the injustice between North and South, and people within the US, between white and people of color. So we're trying to address multiple dimensions of justice and say that in setting the boundaries, we need to think about all of those dimensions.
Yes, and really this is very much appreciated. I hope it gets a lot of attention because there's not enough attention given to this. So we have here the comprehensive interdependence of the different systems, and then the justice component as well. This is really spectacular. I would like to move to a quote from you, because this is very important as well, if you wouldn't mind. You indicated that addressing this Earth systems boundaries crisis, that it requires, and I'm going to quote you, avoiding trade-offs and ensuring that we meet the goals of sustainable development, and ensuring that everyone has access to energy, food, water, and other resources for a dignified life. And we need to assess who is most responsible for the Earth system change, and who is most vulnerable, and who is and who should take action, to reduce the risks and reallocate the resources. And that is, if you don't mind, brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Would you elaborate? Because you pointed out you need to get after who's responsible. You can't say, dear reader, dear listener, watch your carbon footprint, get rid of plastic and things like that. It's a little bit bigger. Please explain.
Yeah, so in the paper in Nature, we do talk about the need to translate the boundaries so that they can be used in policy development or in corporate decision-making. And we focused especially on how cities might manage these Earth system boundaries and the private sector.
Yes.
So we're working with something called the Science-Based Targets Network to have these targets taken up by the private sector as part of their responsibility.
Yes.
There are 2 other aspects of this. One is that a lot of the changes are being driven by the richer countries, the richer people. And although in this paper we don't point fingers specifically, we do point out that we have to address the inequities in the drivers of Earth system change. The role of consumption, the role of trade, the role of big energy users. And what we point out in a related paper, part of the same project, is that you can actually provide access to well-being for the poorest of the poor if you just reduce, not dramatically, but modestly, the consumption of the richest people on the planet. And so the goal is, how can we adjust consumption to be more equal so that it both allows the poor to survive, but also helps us stay within the Earth system boundaries. Mm-hmm. And the one final aspect is the problem of solutions, because there are trade-offs. That's what I talk about. Mm-hmm. There are solutions that can create injustice. So if you put large areas of land into biofuels, or large areas of forests into protection, you can threaten food supply because you've lost agricultural land, or you can be unjustly taking land away from indigenous people or poor countries. So there are these questions of justice in moving ahead and doing something about our system change that we need to pay attention to. We need to try not to create another set of inequities.
Great. And thank you very much for that explanation. And we're going to get low on time here, but I need to get a couple more things in. And what is like the major recommendations of the report, I think you've just sort of covered. But in terms, could we talk a little bit about the Earth Commission itself? What is that group? Because nobody's that familiar with it.
It's a group of scientists internationally who were selected by Future Earth, which is one of the world's biggest science networks looking at the environment. We're working in partnership with a lot of other groups, some of the big think tanks around the world, and also with some of these groups that are working with business, with cities. And we're basically assessing what we know and trying to come up with guidelines that are helpful to policymakers and to businesses as they address the problem of Earth system change. And one of the most important things is I think many groups out there are focusing on climate.
Yes.
But we also need to look at these other Earth system boundaries and manage them together. Yes. And so people are starting to talk about how do you manage climate and biodiversity together. So that's important. Is climate, of course, is incredibly important, but so is pollution, so is biodiversity loss.
Exactly. And you've put these tightly together and then added the justice that we cannot just throw people away or other creatures, for that matter, away. And this is just brilliant. Dr. Liverman, before we go, you have served, I think, on several of the IPCC panels, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And so you've written on those. You've done a huge amount of work with these large studies. What is the difference to you between, say, the IPCC and the Earth Commission?
Well, the IPCC is intergovernmental, so governments do get involved in approving the reports, and they also nominate from all over the world. The Earth Commission is perhaps a smaller, more nimble group, and it's independent of governance. We're not really representing, I'm a dual citizen of the US and the UK. I'm not representing them in the Earth Commission. I'm representing, if you like, the planet, the idea of the global commons that we all need to work towards. So we work as individual scientists, not as representative of countries or institutions.
I see, and that's really important. In your mind, because you've done so much of this kind of work and with different groups, does this one stand out in any way to you for the Earth Commission, what it is up to here?
I think that for me, one of the most important things is that in previous discussions of the importance of justice in global decision-making about the environment, justice has been viewed as something normative and not scientific. And what we're doing in the Earth Commission is showing that there is a large and long-standing scientific literature on justice that shows how inequality causes environmental degradation, how environmental degradation affects the poor. So I think what's important is the that the justice is also scientific, also based on the peer-reviewed literature. It's not just some normative wish list. It's something grounded in what we know and what we've learned.
Great. Thank you for that. That is so important. And I think a lot of people would say they certainly agree that this is not just some feel-good thing, but we owe to all of humanity the right to all of these, a decent environment, a planetary environment. This report has received a lot of media attention. Now, what I've noticed was in the press. That is not common, at least here in the United States. Do you feel there was any reason for that? Can you think of why that should be, that it got all this attention?
Well, it partly has to do with the timing. We came out at a different time from many other reports. I think that the media now is very alert to issues around Earth system change. It's also a year where we've had some devastating damage to nature and to people, with wildfires, with the problems in Antarctic ice melting. So people are alert to these problems. And I think the other thing that helps is that we had so many partners who were also going to talk about it. So our partners in the think tanks are talking to really major corporations about what we're doing and translating the boundaries into guidelines where they can make a commitment to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions or protecting nature. So I think that that's part of it.
Right. And in terms of solutions that this might offer, you pointed out, you got to figure out who is most responsible. And we get, as you know, in the United States, usually, we have to watch our individual carbon footprints and so on. And there is usually a kind of not full face recognition of who the troublemakers are and how we are in so many ways compensating them. Does your report go into this in any more depth?
No. I mean, one of the things I'm conscious about when you're on an international committee is not to sort of over-push the US perspective.
Yeah.
We can get pretty noisy, and I think it's really important for our the authors from the Global South, for example, to have a voice. I would say that I believe that right now, at least at the federal level, the government is taking many of these boundaries seriously, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, protecting nature. And so whilst there isn't a direct link to the Earth system boundaries, I feel as though we do have policymakers right now who are trying to manage multiple risks and take climate particularly more seriously. And it's been a while since we did that in the US. So.
Yeah, that's for sure. How about also other nations? Because you're an international group. This has been one of the criticisms that, we have these meetings and so on, and then people make agreements, but they don't follow through on the agreements. We don't go after, say, the oil industry the way that we should, or some of these corporations that produce these chemicals that are doing so much damage, and on and on. That's my point here. Do you think that this report has said, look, you've got to go after the big guys on this?
I don't think we say that because it's a scientific report, but we do talk about the various strategies for transforming our economy. And some of those are collaborative with the private sector, like to the extent we can work with the big corporations to change. But there are other strategies, such as international legal strategies, the sort of thing youth activists are doing, suing people. There are regulatory strategies. And what we're seeing in the US right now is shifting to a green economy basically through tax credits to the private sector. So we've actually got a lot of different governance strategies, is what we call them, for getting people to shift on the boundaries. So it can range from going after the big polluters to collaborating with the big polluters. And perhaps you start with collaboration and downscaling. And if that doesn't work, you move to the more sort of combative strategies.
I see. Okay. Well, I think we're just about out of time now. I can't thank you enough for joining us and giving this wonderful information. I hope you will be able to spread this report more and more. Will this group be reporting again? Will you meet again, this particular group, to do another report or anything?
We do have a second major report that we hope will be published in the next couple of months, which focuses, it gives a lot more detail on the justice dimensions and on the translation. We're continuing to publish papers, and they're just about to establish the next phase of the Earth Commission, which will have new people, new commissioners, as well as some of the old ones. And they're going to work on some other areas. For example, novel entities like microplastics and pharmaceuticals that are in the Earth system and we need to worry about.
Right. Thank you ever so much for all this excellent information, and I wish you the very best. I know you have been producing this fabulous information for many years yourself, and it sounds like the whole group is just outstanding. Thank you again, and I wish you the best.
Thank you. It's been an honor, and to work with my fellow commissioners, they're amazing. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.